Number 5. CIA PSYOP. One of the most nefarious urban legends about the elf on the shelf is that it is secretly tied to something much, much bigger than Santa Claus and the North Pole. The idea of the elf on the shelf is that you put it in your home, and every night the little guy zoops back to the North Pole and he tells Santa Claus about all your little one's behavior. Makes sense, right? Santa sees you while you're sleeping, but I guess that's not quite enough and he needs little helpers. So the elves are there to act as extra eyes and ears on the ground for Santa, who's a busy guy, I guess. They're called scout elves for this reason. Now, there has been some pushback from parents who argue that the elf on the shelf is conditioning young minds into blindly accepting surveillance at all times. Professor Laura Pinto of the University of Toronto, shout out, suggested this, saying that it communicates to developing minds that it's okay to be spied on at all times if it's for the greater good. In the children's book The Elf on a Shelf originates from, to some this runs all the way to the top, with some conspiracists going so far as to say that the whole Elf on a Shelf storybook and little doll is a CIA operation to covertly steer the public consciousness of early brains towards normalizing a surveillance state, disguising themselves as a cheery Christmas toy company. This might sound utterly ridiculous, and it does sound utterly ridiculous. But first of all, trust me, the CIA has done much stranger things than this. They've even been involved in psyops involving toy-making operations before. Now, whether or not the elf on a shelf is a government conspiracy is one thing, but you do have to admit it's a bit of a weird slant to the Santa angle. Santa watching good kids is one thing, but the elf on a shelf existing as a sort of living camera inside your home, training kids from an early age to always accept authority, always be okay with the idea that someone is watching, has larger implications, I would say. Just another bit of chintzy Christmas cheer? Or could it actually be something more sinister? Toss another log in the fire, get another cup of hot chocolate, because we've got all the best scary stories on the net and some of the best hosts. So just stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary and you won't miss a thing. Number 4. Haunted Elf. Now, I think part of us kind of suspects that maybe, just maybe, the elves on the shelves might be haunted. It's that grin, man. I don't know. I don't trust it. I think it's suspicious. And that's the newer, cleaned up elf on a shelf. Have you ever seen a picture of one of the vintage ones? Even scarier, but maybe that's just because I think the elf kind of looks like Hasbulla. A few years ago, this elf was put up on eBay because the owner was complaining that it was haunted. Makes perfect sense to me. If I had something in my home that had a malevolent spirit inside of it, I would definitely pack it in a crate and send it off for $20.99 plus shipping and handling. The owner of this elf texted her husband, "Haha, look at this. That elf is crazy. Time to pack him up because he's kinda creepy." Apparently after she warned her husband about it, that's when the troubles ramped up with the little holiday spy. It started fairly innocuous. The doorbell would ring on its own randomly during the day. That's easy to look past, right? Weird things happen. Well, one night the owner of the elf was feeling really sick. Too sick to move at all, so she slept on the living room couch instead of the bedroom, with the elf watching the entire night. She said that night she had horrible nightmares, dreaming of the elf cutting at her with tiny knives. Pretty downright horrifying, right? Well, when she woke up, she found the elf inside the cuff of the bottom of her pants, and somehow it gets worse. She continued on to say, "I was in the living room and I walked out and there was a hutch in the corner of the room with glass doors. I clearly saw a black human figure reflected in the glass, and then it moved sharply down the hallway. I ran to the hallway, but nothing was there. I checked in my kids' bedrooms, and they were both fast asleep. So I clearly saw that, and I have never had any experiences like this before." So to get rid of it, she put the elf on eBay to rid herself of the problem forever. But you want to know the truly scary part? The elf only sold for $30. Meaning potentially someone just cursed their home forever and the original owner barely even got enough for pizza out of it.
Number 3, a year-round visitor. Sean's grandma always warned him growing up that the elf in the living room was watching him, even when it wasn't near Christmas. Now in that family they left the darn thing out year-round, since in their version of the legend, the elf would take notes all year, but only had to commute back to the North Pole during the holidays to report back. Creepy, but hey, whatever, I guess I can't judge. With Sean's younger brother and cousins around all the time, he admits it wasn't easy to be good all year round, no matter how hard he tried. When he'd make a mistake and be mean to one of them, he felt the elf staring at him. It would remember that moment. He'd picture it waiting until he was in bed and then running and tattling to Santa. No matter how much he screamed and sobbed to it, the elf wouldn't answer, but just wait with his beady little eyes and just watch. On the 4th of July, now poor Sean accidentally burned a friend with a sparkler. After being lectured by his grandma, when Sean retreated into the living room, the elf was watching, and its mouth was open, almost as if it was saying, "You're bad, no one likes you, Santa thinks you're terrible," so forth, so on. Now at this time it didn't actually speak, but of course in Sean's mind it was obvious that's what it meant. It was the same stuff his grandma said to him, day in and day out. Not healthy. He was convinced that he couldn't be good. Months went by and his best efforts yielded punishment. If he wasn't accidentally knocking over a vase in the kitchen, he was tracking mud into the hallway, all of which would end in a lecture, and Sean wanted so badly to be good. And you know what, for a while, like the entire month of November and a little bit into December, he was. Now Sean, his little brother, and his grandma went to get their Christmas tree on December 4th. They got home and decorated it well, cookies baked in the oven, and he remembered his grandma lifting him with her strong, solid arm so he could put the star on the top of the tree. The next day though, when Sean and his brother had arrived home from school, they were playing around, and like all siblings, they played rough. When they were wrestling, and Sean was spinning his brother around by the arm, he accidentally let him go right into the Christmas tree, which fell onto the hardwood floor. We're talking ornaments broke, lights went out, and the star shattered. Neil was passed out on the ground, and the elf spoke to Sean, like actually spoke. "You've been very bad, Sean, very bad." Sean was astounded, and then the elf spoke once again. "You've been so bad." Now when Grandma got home, she rushed both boys to the hospital, and thankfully they were fine, and Sean's little brother never ratted him out. He didn't get many gifts for Christmas, and he vowed to be better the next year. Oh, and by the way, the elf didn't come back next year. He managed to get rid of it. Number 2, an eBay listing. So I was shopping for Christmas presents last week when I spotted an interesting listing advertising a cursed elf that was purchased at an estate sale. The seller apparently brought the elf home and set it up, and the traditional strange things began to happen, but the buyer didn't make the connection to the elf until she tried to put it away. But she also, posed the elf with a kitchen utensil. The doll would move by itself, the doorbell would ring at odd hours, and shadow people started appearing in the home. She was trying to get rid of the thing, and sadly my browser glitched before I could screenshot what I was reading. But I swear it was real. I tried to find it again later. No bueno. But it was genuinely a real listing. Number 1, a traveling elf. First-year college student Sally Boone grew up with the creepy little figure being an annual nuisance in her home. While she figured out the truth about the little guy pretty quickly, her younger sister bought into the legend. Hook, line, and sinker. Oh, before I forget, they named their elf Humble, by the way, which is a curious name for an elf. But granted, I'm used to being around elves named Holly, Jolly, and Lolly, so make of that what you will. Sally had returned home for Thanksgiving after living on campus for the first few months of uni, and groaned internally when she saw Humble sitting on the mantle. Just chilling there. When she got up on Sunday morning, the day she was supposed to head back to her apartment, her mom asked, "Hey, where's Humble? It had been the whole weekend, it has happened," and then, where'd he go? He was missing. Nobody in the house seemed to know where he went. Now when he couldn't be found, Sally's mom took her sister aside and tried to explain that Humble must have been delayed at Santa's workshop because of the storm. And to her great surprise, the little sister not only bought it, but she was delighted. She said that she told Humble that she worried about Sally living away from home and asked if he could spend some time at her apartment to make sure she was safe. And that's where he must be. In true improv fashion, the mom eagerly went along with this since it gave her time to find a replacement doll and told Sally to call as soon as she got home to confirm that Humble was safe and sound. The things we do for our parents. Now Sally headed back to her apartment, and as she made it through her front door, with a million bags, she caught a glimpse of something bright red standing out against the off-white of her kitchenette. Yep, you guessed it, it was Humble, sitting on top of the Keurig with his legs crossed and his hands in his lap. Sally knew it was that specific elf because her mother had put a bell from a Lindor chocolate bunny around its waist like a belt and stuck a miniature candy cane in it, for pizzazz. Ticked, and rightfully so, she took a photo and texted it to her mom with the message, "Did you do this?" The mom's response? Asking Sally why on earth she would kidnap the Christmas mascot her sister loved so much. Sally was at a loss for words. She asked her mom if she still had the spare key to her place, and when the mom confirmed as such, and that she didn't use it, Sally freaked out. At this point, she'd searched her entire apartment for any sign of forced entry, a hidden intruder, something missing or damaged, any evidence at all, and found nothing. The only thing out of place was Humble, and this wasn't making any sense. Of course, there was an obvious, irrational explanation for where Humble came from, but Sally didn't want to think about that. Her mom suggested she go back to, home for safety, but Sally didn't want to get back in her car or miss class the next day, so she asked her boyfriend to come crash for a night for safety. And he did so without questions. Now that left the issue of what to do with Humble. Obviously she should have just mailed him back home, but that would have required she touch the creepy doll, and the legend of the elf on the shelf is that you don't touch it or else you'll ruin the magic. She still thought somebody from her family was playing a trick on her, knowing she was afraid to touch Humble and ruin the magic. Sally just couldn't bring herself to do it, but instead, in true, Toy Story inspiration, started talking to it. "Hey Humble, I know my sister asked you to keep an eye on me, and I know you're just trying to make her happy, but you're supposed to be watching her to report back to Santa, remember? I know you used to watch me, but I'm a grown-up now. I don't even get presents from Santa anymore. You don't need to watch me, and I'd hate for your report on my sis to be inaccurate because you're here and not there. So please, after you report back to the North Pole tonight, go back home, let everybody know I'm doing okay." She then opened the cupboard and pulled out a pack of blueberry turnovers, placing one beside Humble. "That's for Santa. I know it's probably not his favorite kind of cookie, but it's all I have right now. Merry Christmas, Humble." She was exhausted, so once her boyfriend arrived, she explained the nonsense and the duo crashed in her room for the night. The next morning, Sally mentally pepped herself up to move Humble so she could, make coffee. But when she opened her bedroom door, Humble was gone and so was the cookie. Now, her first thought was that her boyfriend must have moved him at some point, but the only time he ever got out of bed was to use the washroom, which was adjacent to the bedroom and didn't attach to the living area. Also, the cookie just being gone, he would have left crumbs or eaten it or whatever. She looked everywhere, nothing. Suddenly, her phone pinged with a text from her sister, reading, "Humble's back. He wants me to tell you that Santa says thanks for the blueberry cookie. Chocolate chip's his favorite, but it was still yummy." So Sally was still in shock, with no idea how the doll could have left her apartment and made it back home. Later that day, she got a text from her mom, who seemed content to write the whole thing off as Sally and her sister playing a trick on her, as payback for everything she ever made them believe about the doll. Sally tried convincing her otherwise, but to no avail. So for the rest of the holiday season, Humble split his time between visiting Sally and her younger sister. Sally tried putting up cameras to catch him in the act to figure this out, but no luck. It wasn't until the day Sally was supposed to go home for Christmas, though, that things got really weird. Humble made his usual appearance, but this time he was blocking the front door. Sally couldn't bring herself to move him to go home, and while her sister understood, her mom was annoyed and complained that the joke needed to end. Sally did go home the next day, and to this day, the mystery of the visiting Humble hasn't been solved.
Number 5 on this list is hitting the elf. As far as the story with the elf on the shelf goes, if a child is to touch the elf on a shelf, then all of its magical abilities will leave, and the only way you can bring it back is to sprinkle cinnamon around it and leave it overnight. If you do that, then its magical abilities will return, and it will continue reporting to Santa Claus. However, there's a legend that if instead of touching the elf, you hit it or abuse it in some way, rather than lose its magical ability, you turn the elf into a force of evil. Similar to the legend of Krampus, where he will punish you for being bad, this elf will do something similar if you abuse it and it labels you as a bad kid. Now that you're labeled as an especially bad kid and have harmed the elf, it will turn from a nice elf into an evil elf meant to make you pay for your actions. If you do this, then you can expect the elf to awaken in the night, except instead of reporting back to Santa Claus, it will enter your room and beat you the same way that you beat it. This will be an extended torture session from this now demonic elf whose only mission is to make you feel the pain that it felt. This process will occur every night right up until Christmas time, when the elf will finally go away. However, that might mean that you could be getting tortured every evening by a demonic elf for weeks. Apparently, even if you try to kill this elf or send it away during the daytime when it should once again sit on your shelf, it will still come and find you in the night and be even angrier than it was before. Nobody knows how you can combat this thing if this ever was to happen to you. So the legend just further enforces that you shouldn't touch the elf on the shelf, and if you do, then make sure you don't intentionally harm it in any way. Number 4 on this list is the tiny camera. The whole elf on a shelf thing has really taken off in the last few years, with millions of tiny little elves being sold. It has also become one of the biggest trends come Christmas time and synonymous with the holiday itself. The whole nature of the elf on a shelf is to watch you in your home and make sure that you're good. We suspend our disbelief a little bit and believe that this little tiny elf doll comes to life and then reports that back to Santa. In one family's elf on a shelf though, this info wasn't going back to Santa Claus at all. In 2011, a family had an elf on the shelf for about 3 weeks before they noticed this wasn't just an innocent doll. Inside the elf was a tiny camera that was sending video to a feed. The camera was dead when they found it, but they have no idea how long it would have been running and recording them. This sparked a theory that the elf on a shelf is a method for big corporations to get inside our homes and learn more information about us. People have even gotten further with this and theorized that it may be the government who's behind this and wants to have an extra eye on what's going on in the typical domestic lifestyle. It's also possible that in that one instance with the family, a creeper installed the camera and it was going to one select person. They never found out how the camera got there or who it was going to, so it's left it up in the air for people to speculate on. Having thousands of mini cameras installed in these tiny elves to watch us seems a little bit far-fetched to me, but we've seen the government or corporations do crazier things before.
Number 3, Little Footsteps. Our next story comes to us from Reddit. We love a good ghost story from Reddit around here, and this elf on a shelf is a pretty popular subject for a good amount of urban legends. There's something about him. I think we're all universally a little creeped out by this guy. Finally gave in. I got one of those stupid elf on the shelf dolls. I've never been one of those moms who do this kind of thing, especially something like the elf on a shelf. Just seemed like too much of a hassle for quick laughs, and it would end up being a mess for me to clean up later. But I got tired of hearing all those perfect moms in the PTA talk about their Pinterest-worthy elf on the shelf ideas. Oh, so cute, so clever. So how hard could it be? I figured I'd get one, and I'd switch it up every now and again, if only to shut my mother-in-law up for a couple weeks. So I did. I actually tried for a few days, and I was pretty proud of myself too. For a whole week, I set that little elf up in different mischievous places every night. I was really proud of myself. But perhaps I got a little too smug for my lazy self because, well, as per usual, after a week I got tired of extra work I had to do for my little guy. Was I ashamed that I gave up after a week? A little, but not enough to make me feel bad about putting the elf in the box in the attic. Somehow he got out of the box. I started seeing the elf in the shelf everywhere, except I wasn't the one placing him. And then I found the elf on a shelf with a knife and my kid's gerbil, dead. I found him by the oven when my casserole had been set for 500 degrees overnight while we slept, and the smoke had poured out and swamped the kitchen. That morning I poured my husband coffee as per usual. I went to go wake him up, and upon my return, I found that damn elf next to the bleach by the coffee mug. I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Maybe the footsteps I keep hearing is my mind playing tricks on me. Or maybe, just maybe, it really is moving around. Number 2, elf on a nightmare. Now, not every parent likes the elf on a shelf. Some parents are deterred by it, thinking it's just another bit of Christmas consumerism, one more thing to buy. Of course, some parents are also concerned because of the unintentional horror it can bring. This story comes to us from a blogger on a parenting blog describing what happened after she brought the elves into her home. She chose to get little tiny elves, saying that they were elf babies harvested fresh from an evergreen tree on a Thanksgiving day. Cute enough, right? Well, except the writer's kids were downright terrified of them. While they might have looked cute and festive during the daytime, when darkness falls and the shadows hit them just right, they'd be terrifying in the night, and I absolutely believe that. I mean, imagine being a little kid and seeing that thing watching you while you're sleeping. Her youngest son said that he would wake up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions and would swear up and down that the elf babies were standing on the end of his bed. Now, kids say the wildest things, but 3 a.m. does stand out a bit for me. That is the witching hour, after all. She tried to explain to her son that he had nightmares or night terrors and that, well, it's hard to understand what he saw isn't real. But he kept insisting that it was. However, the writer started to notice strange occurrences going on around their house that she just couldn't explain. She lost her car keys one day and found them in a place she'd said that she had never put them before in her life. She found doors unlocked that were locked when she left the house. Important documents going missing that she couldn't explain. She said one day her child took her by the hand and explained in a slow, exaggerated voice, unlike how he usually spoke, that the elves were behind all of these events. She goes on to say that she started to find the elves move from where she'd put them. She asked her son if he'd moved them at all, and he panicked, saying he hadn't. The writer notes she was starting to worry that maybe her son was using the elves to play a trick on her, or that these elves truly did have some sinister power. Her son broke down in tears and begged her to lock him up. She did, and the next morning, the elves were in the bathroom sink instead of locked away in the filing cabinet she put them in the night before. So she decided to mail them away, far away to people in different states. What worries her is that one of them made it to the destination, but the Postal Service lost the second one, meaning wherever it was, it could still be out there, going to who knows where. So just be careful when you're ordering an elf on the shelf. And number 1, the elf came back. Our final story also comes to us from Reddit. The story begins with a Redditor talking about how he wanted to get an elf on the shelf with his girlfriend Stephanie for the holidays, as they'd been seeing each other for a while and he wanted to get festive for the season. He saw a boy carrying an elf in the shelf in a mason jar while at a restaurant, and apparently it was cute enough to inspire him to get his own. His girlfriend giggled when she saw it at the apartment, and it was sitting on the counter next to a fresh cup of coffee. The couple was having fun finding creative ways to set it up around the apartment, finding fun new ways to surprise each other. Together they named it Bonnie. One day, his girlfriend had come home and discovered that Bonnie was holding a piece of paper telling her to turn around. And when she did, the poster was there holding a wedding ring. She started crying and jumped on him, but unfortunately, the holiday cheer wouldn't last. After their proposal, their relationship started to suffer. She started to become more controlling, wouldn't let him see his friends, wouldn't let him talk to other women, wouldn't even let him call his mom. She started to judge his appearance and personality more. Eventually, the couple couldn't take it anymore, and the two split up and she moved out. The two had a violent argument and he was struck with a coffee mug. The next morning, he woke up and she had packed up everything and left, but had left Bonnie the elf. Later, her mother would contact him. He noted that he never liked her mother. She was involved in strange things like witchcraft. But she did say she was sorry to hear about the split and was surprised to hear about it and that Stephanie had told her everything. A couple months pass and the OP notices Bonnie the elf moving around the apartment in different places. On a shelf, a couch, a fridge. Not wanting to be reminded of the memories, he threw it away, only to discover that it was back in his apartment somehow. He called the police because he suspected that someone, possibly his ex-girlfriend, had broken into his apartment to stage a complicated prank. He asked the police to seize the elf, and they did, but not really understanding why. Weeks pass, and the OP had invited a new girl over for a date. She picked up Bonnie the elf and almost immediately began to bleed from her nose. OP ripped the dolls out of her hands and threw it at the wall, but as soon as he'd done that, the girl fell to the floor unconscious. He noticed that Bonnie the elf didn't look the same, and that Bonnie now looked like Stephanie, his ex-girlfriend.
Number 5, where the heck did this thing come from? So ever wonder what happens when the festive turns freaky? Well, meet the McGinnis family. This all started on a quaint morning with breakfast smells, wafting throughout the air, but in the midst of holiday cheer lurked a haunting elf on the shelf in the kitchen window. The McGinnis home, an unsuspecting host to this tiny, festive specter. Nobody had any clue where it came from, by the way, since while the family celebrated Christmas, the parents refused to bring the doll in their house or introduce it as part of their holiday traditions, since they considered it, creepy and too much work. If there are any young folks watching, heads up, we're gonna spoil the magic. The mom tossed it out in the trash, assuming that maybe the family cat had brought it in from somewhere outside overnight. Because, cats like to gather. Well, what do you know? The next day the darn thing was back, and this time hanging from the dining room chandelier. Guess that ruled out the cat theory. Over the next month, no matter what the parents did to try and dispose of the elf, every morning it would somehow return to being inside the house. The entire family was freaked out, and eventually begged a local priest to make a house visit. Now, with it being the holiday season, the priest was way too busy to deal with the possibly demonic doll until after Christmas and Advent were over, promising to pay them a visit on December 26th. Now, the family had made the decision to wait and celebrate the holidays until after the priest came to visit, because they didn't know what was going on. But they woke up on the morning of the 26th and could no longer find the figure anywhere in the home, no matter how hard they looked. Now, when the priest arrived, they explained the exasperating situation to him, and while he was a smidge confused, he blessed the house anyways, and the doll has never returned since. Thank goodness. Number 4, where do things go? Exhausted mom Stella had successfully avoided Elf on the Shelf for, the first several years of her offspring's lives, but one year she caved, and regrets it to this day. Instead of the traditional elf, she introduced little elves into the household. The story behind them was that they were harvested fresh from the branches of an evergreen tree on Thanksgiving Day. The intention was that the tiny elves would eventually grow into elf adults over the years. Now, sadly, her youngest was terrified by the new additions to the household, and rightfully so. While they are adorable when seen by the light of day, they apparently take on a sinister appearance in the dead of night. He woke up at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions and swore that the tiny elves were standing on the end of his bed, holding hands with each other and staring at him menacingly, with their shadow exaggeratedly, largely on the wall by the glow of the nightlight. She tried to assure him that he was merely the victim of an overactive imagination, but in the days following his nighttime terrors, Stella started to notice strange occurrences going on in the house, and was struggling to come up with a reasonable explanation. One day she lost her car keys and only eventually found them in a place where she never put them. She found doors unlocked overnight when she knew for a fact that she locked them. Important papers had gone missing, you name it, it happened. After each of these strange occurrences, her youngest calmly took her hand and explained to her in a slow, exaggerated voice that the little elves had been the culprits behind all of these events. Now, a couple of times, Stella placed the little elves carefully on the kitchen counter and then turned around to find them gone. One day she went to, her sons in a shrieky sort of panic, asking if they'd seen them, and her youngest found them in a weird place that none of the family had put them. Stella was determined to safely lock the elves in a cabinet and, let them rot, but when she checked the next morning, they weren't there. She found them in the bathroom sink, and what do you know, they multiplied. Naturally, she decided to do what anyone troubled with a demon or poltergeist or ghosts or supernatural being would do, and send them in the mail to friends. Now here's a fun little twist. They became lost in transit, and the US Postal Service can't tell her exactly where they're going to end up. Yikes.
Number 3 on this list is Mormo. Mormo is the name given to one very particular elf on the shelf who is quite unlike the rest of them. Legend says that there is one elf that tries to impersonate an elf on the shelf and break into your home. This creature is a demon though whose only intentions are to kill. This legend started due to a brutal murder which took place a few years back. A wife and a husband had both been killed in a way that the police had an extremely hard time understanding. When the authorities got to the home and discovered the crime scene, there was blood everywhere and the couple was both lying in the middle of their living room. There was no signs of forced entry and nothing was taken though. The authorities thought that it might be a murder-suicide, however the manner of their death indicated that a third party was involved. One thing that stood out to the police was the blood-spattered elf on a shelf positioned on the mantelpiece in full view of whatever it was that took place. The police were never able to determine the true cause of death, but this story sparked the legend of Mormo, the demon elf on the shelf. Now people believe that every time you get an elf on the shelf, you are simply rolling the dice and could end up with Mormo. If you do, then it's very possible that you and your family will die in a tragic and unexplained way before Christmas time. I'm not sure how much validity this has to it, kind of seems like somebody really ran with the story on this one, but having a devilish killer elf on the shelf like Chucky certainly isn't a pleasant thought. Number 2 on this list is that the entire Elf on a Shelf story was constructed by a demon. The entire premise behind the Elf on a Shelf is a little creepy to begin with. You're letting this magical little doll into your home to watch and judge your actions, then when you're asleep, this doll gets up and flies back to Santa to let him make a final judgment on if you are good or bad. It's basically like a Christmas version of Big Brother. That being said though, we love Christmas and we love Santa so much that when we think about Santa, it doesn't seem so bad. But what if this elf on the shelf isn't reporting back to Santa at all? What if it was reporting back to a demon? In 2008, a woman who had an elf on the shelf started to notice little things missing from her home during the Christmas season. First it was her keys, then it was some of the kitchenware, and then some other more valuable items. She also started to notice that things started to go wrong. Appliances that were relatively new just stopped working. Leaks were happening in the home and the electricity kept going on and off. She had no idea what the catalyst of these problems could have been until she linked it to the elf on the shelf. They only started happening when she brought that thing into her home. Since then, other rumors have surfaced about people noticing things that are missing from their homes whilst having this little elf in their house. The story has snowballed to a place where there is now a community of people who swear these things aren't working for Santa at all, but actually for a mischievous demon. A demon who simply wants to wreck the Christmas season and cause chaos in your home. It should also be noted that the items and things that went wrong kept getting worse and worse the longer you kept that thing in your home. So who knows how bad things could get if you keep that thing in there for the entire season. Number 1 on this list is a devilish name. A rule associated with the elf on the shelf is that the family housing this elf must give it a name. Typically people go down the silly route and name it something like Mary Martha or Twinkle Toes or something ridiculous like that. All of that is fine and good and very in the Christmas spirit. However, there are a few names that you need to avoid when you're naming your elf on the shelf, or you may run the risk of devilish possession. Names such as Lucifer, Bile, Gorgo, these names are all infernal names, which are names that are linked to anti-hero figures used in satanic rituals. If you ever give your elf on the shelf an infernal name, and there's actually a full list of infernal names that you can look up if you want to double check, but if you do this, then you just open the door for your elf to become possessed by a demon. Just because the door is open doesn't mean that any demon will walk through it, however, you don't really want to be giving them the option in the first place. Christmas time is a time of love and family and also to celebrate religion, all really nice things. If you are a demon though, this is one of the worst times of the year and you are itching to cause any type of chaos that you can and ruin the fun. If a demon takes over your elf on a shelf due to its name, then there's no limit to the amount of nastiness it could cause. Not only could this devilish puppet haunt your home, torture you in the night, or wreck your style of living, but now that a demon is in your home and possessing this elf, what's to say that it won't start trying to possess you? Also, typically these elves leave a little bit after Christmas, but there's no timeline when it's possessed by a demon. That thing could stay and destroy your home and even your lives for however long it feels like. My advice is to stick to the silly when naming your elf on the shelf.